Welcome back. So the last thing we talked about in the Rococo was the Prince Bishop of Würzburg's impressive Rococo palace, as you might recall. Here it is, known as the Würzburg residence. But it's not just the palaces that are Rococo and showing the combination of church and state in Germany during the 1700s. That church and state combination is also pretty evident in the Rococo cathedrals that are being produced. In particular, we see big Rococo Catholic cathedrals in the German state of Bavaria, where church and state were very closely linked during this period. If we look at the Weiskirche here, this is a church that was actually created after one of the statues in the old church had a statue of Jesus was supposed to be miraculously crying. So they tore the church down and they built a new one for the statue so everyone could come admire their crying statue. It's the Rococo era. Notice the lovely pastel colors, but what I want you to notice in particular are the rounded and curving lines. That's what makes this so different from a Rococo building. Inside, you'll see that we've got that, but I just said so different from a Rococo building. I meant so different from a Baroque building. Stick with me, I promise. Curved lines instead of the harder Greek forms of columns, triangles, squares is what makes Rococo different from Baroque. Inside, we have the painted ceiling that you might have seen in a Baroque church, but notice it's got a lot more pastel. You can just make out at the top the edges of a rainbow. There's actually a Jesus sitting on a rainbow on that ceiling there. And what else have we got besides pastel and a bright, airy space? Oh my Lord, have we got stucco. And remember, we said stucco is sign that we're going Rococo wild. That fantastic stucco play, that covered with gold, not covered with gold, all the frills, all the curls, that's Rococo, baby. Neumann, who designs the Würzburg Palace, designed more than one Rococo church as well. The 14 Heiligen, or 14 holy people. I think they usually translate it as the holy helpers, but the 14 holy folks, I suppose, would work as well. In Bavaria. Again, notice the curves and the extra statuary compared to a Baroque church on the exterior here. And inside, you'll notice, oh, stucco, stucco, stucco. So much stucco. Stucco around the high altar, stucco on the columns. We actually know that some of those columns are, you guessed it, stucco painted to look like marble. Look at the statues crammed into this bad boy. Even though the Baroque is all about flash and power, we're going to add so much more gold, so much more stucco, and in the case of these incredible statues, so much to look at. These 14 statues, you can see some of them here, are not all made of stucco. But the 14 statues are actually plague helpers that the Germans called on in times of disease. And if we look at the high altar, which has this incredible painting over it, the idea that some of these folks are statues stuck to the wall, some of the stucco coming straight off the lectern, those are things you couldn't have done if everything had been made of marble, if everything had been made of gold. It really would have just been too heavy. So the mix of marble and stucco and alabaster has to be very carefully done. You don't want to put the real deal next to the fake deal in a way that'll show up that your fake is fake. So this is an incredible blend, and it's very beautifully done, even if it might be a bit over the top for today's tastes. So we're going to ditch the German states and instead float over briefly to Russia. Russia holds on to the Baroque for a long time, and it takes trends a little longer to get to Russia since it's way out on the edge of Europe. But the Italian architect Francesco Bartolomeo Rastrelli is going to come to Russia in the mid-1700s, where he works in particular for the Empress Elizabeth. And the Empress Elizabeth is going to be a big fan of trying to not just make more Peter the Great style Baroque, but upgrade some of that to Rococo. In particular, the Catherine Palace in Russia at a place called Tsarskoye Selo, today it's the town of Pushkin, outside St. Petersburg, is a summer house of the Tsars. And this is what Rastrelli does. It was named after Peter the Great's wife, Catherine I. And it was a summer house until the Empress Elizabeth kept the name, knocked the house down, built her own new summer house, and it was Rococo now. Notice the rounded lines, in particular all those circular windows, the curves above them, and notice how much ornamentation we've added to the outside. All that freaking gold and stucco is a lot of work. And in particular, you can't really do much stucco on the outside of a building if you're going to get it wet and ruin it. You have to be quite careful. So sometimes we see alabaster and things on an exterior. It's a lot of planning. In this case, they did manage to put stucco on the exterior and, wait for it, yes, 100 kilograms of gilding. 100 kilograms of gold painted over that stucco. Think about that for a minute. That's why the Tsars end up getting assassinated. That's all I'm saying. It's a beautiful piece, and inside you can still see some of the stucco interiors. More gold. All that stucco, all that lightness, very Rococo fantasy in architecture. Now, Tsars after Elizabeth tended to change her style and add different rooms. And the palaces outside St. Petersburg actually took a battering during the German invasion of Russia in the Second World War. It's probably why they have a giant repair ladder and some scaffolding going up inside. But the Catherine Palace is an important place. By the way, if you're thinking Catherine the Great, that was Catherine II, later Catherine. This is named after Catherine I. But Catherine the Great did do something amazing in the previous Catherine's palace. Russia had for a while now what was called the Amber Room. These were giant panels composed of thousands of pieces of amber from the Baltic Ocean coast. Frederick the Great had gotten them together and put them into panels, and his plan was to cover a room in it. He decided it was too much work. And when Peter the Great came through his territory in the early-ish 1700s, Frederick the Great gave him this white elephant, right? These amber-covered wall panels that he couldn't make work. And he said, ha-ha, get rid of this problem and give a host gift. Woo! So Peter the Great took them back to Russia, and he decided they were too much work also. However, Peter the Great didn't put them together, but Catherine II, Catherine the Great, put them together in Catherine I, Peter the Great's wife's, palace. Yeah, she told her architects fix it or die, and they had a way of making things work with the right motivation. They also bought a lot more amber and used all this incredible stucco and gold to hold it together. We know there are more than 350 shades of amber in the room and more than 13,000 pounds of the precious stone. Think about that, 13,000 pounds. It was considered one of the wonders of the world, and the picture that you see on the left is the original amber room. Now, the amber room was stunning. It was amazing. It was an incredible luxury piece, and the Germans stole that in World War II also. And then it either got stolen or accidentally bombed, but we haven't seen it since the Second World War. So in 1979, Russia realized they wanted to rebuild this wonder of the world, which they had been so famous for. And they managed to get the Germans to help chip in since they'd ruined the original. From 1979 to about 2003, so roughly 24 years, they rebuilt it. And between all the workmanship, all the amber, all the gold leafed over the stucco, it's estimated to be worth more than $500 million in today's terms, which I believe. Unfortunately, these images show it with electricity. And they say that when you had seen it originally as Catherine the Great would have by candlelight, the amber glow was even more spectacular. I'd say pretty amazing stuff. Can we be more Rococo fantasy world? I don't know if we can. Spain has another great example of fabulous fantasy architecture. This is a palace that a Spanish noble built for himself in Valencia. And notice the outside has the carefully painted exterior. We know the paint has been redone on a number of occasions, but notice all the faux marble. What makes this building Rococo is the soft curves, especially on the top story, and, oh yes, all the stucco and alabaster. Around the front entrance, which you see here, sculpted by Vergara, that's the main entrance. It's a bit intense. You can also see, if you look around the edges, why Catherine the Great herself used to call Rococo a whipped cream style, because it really does look pretty over-the-top frou-frou. But all those wild curves, all those fantasy bits, Rococo, Rococo, Rococo. We're going to talk Italy before we wrap things up here. I wanted to show you this room because we talked about the creation of European porcelain, and we also talked about the panels of the amber room. Well, this is a paneled room created as a fantasy space, only it's panels of porcelain instead of panels of amber. This is the porcelain created near Naples, and it was built for the Queen of Naples. This would have been the Queen of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, Maria Amalia of Saxony. Excuse me. She clearly inherited a very German love of porcelain. And coming from Saxony, she would have been coming from Meissen Porcelain's home turf. So they made these incredible painted porcelain walls for her private boudoir. They were originally in the Palace of Portici, and now they're in the Palace of Capodimonte. But great example of a Rococo fantasy space, including if you look at that over-the-top chandelier. Some of the best Rococo work in Italy is done in the form of painting. A lot of Italian artists are going to go abroad to do stucco work, and they'll do stucco work in their own country. But the painters, in particular, some of the last really famous Venetian painters in art are going to be from this era. One of those is Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. And this is his ceiling done in one of the halls of a Venetian charity. I wanted you to see the way it's put up in the hall so that you could see the incredible gilt and stucco all around it. How much the setting is that Rococo stucco. But you can also see the painting up close. In some ways, especially at the bottom where you can see chiaroscuro, it looks a little Baroque, that darkness, those crouching saints and sinners. But the way the Madonna floats in across a pastel sky is what makes this a more Rococo painting than Baroque. Baroque wouldn't have had that soft, soft blue and those clouds that are just a little bit rosy on the edges. Tiepolo did works that were religious, but he also did works for private homes. In fact, we're back to our Prince Bishop of Würzburg. And the Prince Bishop of Würzburg had an incredible ceiling done by Tiepolo, who came up from Italy to Germany, bringing with him several of his sons to help. And he needed the help because this is almost 7,300 square feet worth of ceiling. It is literally the largest fresco in the world. And remember, fresco is a painting that's done while the plaster is still wet so that the color is absorbed. That's a lot of freaking work. The incredible painting here was done over about 3 or 4 years. And you can just make out Apollo riding in triumphantly. And we have all the continents kind of creepily depicted around the edges. Notice we're right back to those pastel skies. This is Apollo right here with the sun, by the way, in case you were looking for him. There's also stucco figures in each corner with gilt holding them up. Now, I don't want to focus too much on Tiepolo Sr., if you will, because his sons were talented. Probably the most talented is sometimes called Gian Domenico or Giovanni Domenico Tiepolo. And although we have work he did, both religious and mythological work, from his career during his time in his father's workshop and after his father's death when he ran things independently, the most amazing frescoes for a lot of art historians, and definitely for me personally, are the frescoes this Tiepolo did for his personal home. What do you do when you decorate your own space with stuff that you do for a living? Well, Tiepolo did a lot of very playful, very Rococo work. We know his front entryway had these pictures of people at a fair in Venice from the back, and this playful crowd is kind of charming and goofy. But even better, there were rooms full of these guys. These Pulcinello, or this is a Pulcinello, these are Pulcinelli, I think you'd say. These are the sort of goofy everyman clown from that old Italian Commedia dell'arte, those Italian set pieces like Harlequin and Columbine that we looked at before. And they are doing all sorts of rough and tumbling acrobatics, pulling pranks all over the walls, and here we have them playing with swings on the ceiling. They're a blast, and they let you know how much Tiepolo loves the goofiness of what he's living through, or at least is willing to laugh at the mayhem that exists in Italy before it, just like the German states and the Russians, is going to experience the upheaval of revolution that gets rid of the Rococo style for good. One of the most important portrait artists documenting the wealthy and their escape from reality in Italy during this time, or the Italian states, is the Venetian portrait artist Rosalba Carriera. She's an incredible portrait pioneer in the Rococo period, and she's an artist who's most famous, although she's capable of doing paintings and certainly painted many miniatures, she's most famous for these pastels. And people love the pastels in part because they're so flattering. They soften all the edges, like a good filter on your phone. This is Young Lady with a Parrot, and it's about as Rococo as you can get. The soft pastels, the flowers in her hair, the delicate pearls, and the ridiculously tacky and naughty parrot actually pulling open the human's shirt to reveal her boobs. Oh, Rococo, this is why some people criticize you. However, it's a fabulous composition, and the sense of motion and the flow of the fabric and her interesting posture, an example of why Carriera was incredibly successful as an artist. My favorite of these Rococo Venetian painters is Pietro Longhi. And one of the things I love about him is that he has these detailed little scenes. In some ways, they show everyday life in Venice. But the everyday life they're showing is definitely if you have enough money to go party and play. This is Venice at its seediest. During these years, Venice was still a small independent Italian republic, but Venice didn't have the money it had from great navy and great trading during, say, the 1600s. So it had become a sort of tourist trap where people did gambling, famous for its prostitutes, and its over-the-top, no-hold-barred partying society. A little bit like Las Vegas. And in particular, for months at a time, they'd allow you to wear masks. They stretched Carnival and the pre-Lenten partying to a point where it was about 4 months long. They also allowed you to wear masks in a build-up to Christmas. Women would wear these dark masks, which you see in the back, a woman with a dark black mask. And you see the men would wear these white rectangular masks called bautas. The fortune teller is telling this young woman's hand, and she might be looking for love, but you don't have to know what the fortune teller is going to say to see there's a man in a mask sneaking up on her with seduction in mind. These are the kind of goofy little jokes that are slightly poking fun at the sort of corruption of Venice without being so judgy that you get tired of them like the Dutch. Our last Italian is Canaletto. Canaletto is a strange choice for the Rococo, and he fits in that period, but there are some art historians who don't always want to put him there. And this is because Canaletto is not pastel flowers. In fact, he's beautifully straight-edged architectural buildings that he managed to create using a camera obscura. It's where you look in the little black box and then lenses reflect back what you're seeing so that you can trace it perfectly straight. What people sometimes wonder Vermeer might have done. Whatever it is, I think artists who use camera obscura are not lazy paint by numbers. Instead, in particular in Canaletto's piece, they add their own spin to things. We know Canaletto might use camera obscura to get the buildings just right, but the colors are all his own, and he ends up creating what Italians sometimes call capricci, Capricci, or imaginary views. So what might start as tracing a reflection of the buildings on the Grand Canal here in Venice ends up being the weather was changed to make it more perfect. Or all of a sudden the canal was widened so it looks nicer. And then he tidies up the buildings so that they look the way he wants them to. He makes things more spacious, he makes them a little more glamorous, and he often adds a heck of a lot more sunshine. Also, his architecture is just beautifully precise. Some people criticize Canaletto. Why do you change reality? But I think that's what makes him a Rococo artist. We want it to be better than reality. We want to ignore reality. And although he's most famous for these paintings of Venice, which sold like hotcakes to tourists who came to the city looking for good art, Canaletto traveled other places, particularly Britain, and if you've ever seen a sunnier Britain than when Canaletto paints it, I'll eat my hat. It's not global warming, it's a fabulous Italian fantasy. Okay, so Rococo, all about ignoring reality. Next art forms we're going to look at, reality's going to start sneaking in. Talk to you.